Hello and welcome to DCS A10. This video we're going to look at the functionality of the TAD, and I'm going to try and cover most of the features here, but there's some features that I'm not going to be able to do, and any that I don't do, I'll try and include them in a subsequent and shorter video. So we can see our TAD is on the left hand side of the it's on the left hand side MFCD by default, although this can be swapped over quite easily, as can all the master modes. Currently we're in the fixed mode of the TAD, the display mode of the TAD, and this is the moving map display. And we can recognize this by the fact that the symbol representing our aircraft always remains fixed at the center of the screen, and its orientation doesn't change. So this is also characterized by two large circles, and they're representing the scale on the map. And on the top right hand side we can see the numerical value of the scale, and what this correlates to is it's a number 5, so it's 5 miles, and it correlates to the diameter of the radius of the large circle. So if we're to look at the diameter, which is the width or the height of the screen, it's always double that fixed scaling factor. So we could say that if the scaling factor is 5, the area on the screen that we're looking at is 10 by 10 miles. In order to zoom in and out of the TAD, we use the DMS switch, and we can zoom out by using DMS down. And we can see by zooming out the scaling factor is rising, and it rises to a maximum of 160. You can zoom in again using DMS up. You can see that switch moving here. So let's look at the largest scale here, and we can see it's 160, and what that translates to in terms of area is, remember, it's double the scaling factor, so it's approximately 320 miles left to right by 320 miles north to south. Well, it's not north to south, but it's top to bottom. And the screen is rotating, the moving map is rotating, and it's very similar to the way the compass rotates on the HSI. And in fact, if you look at the HSI,
warning, autopilot,
and the compass together, we can see if we look at the compass and the HSI together, we can see that the cardinal positions mimic each other. On the inner circle we can see there's 4 marks, and they represent the cardinal positions of the compass, north, south, east and west, and it's characterized, the triangle characterizes the north. So we can see north is almost on our 3 o'clock position, between 3 and 4 on our HSI, and it's also on our TAD. So if we look now in more detail at the TAD, we can see there's a whole lot of different options. These can be accessed by using the relevant OSBs. I'll just call them buttons to simplify my description. So we can see that button 1 here is a control button, and if we look at button 2 to 5, we can see that by clicking each of them in turn, we change some of the symbology which is visible on the screen. So we can choose what we want to display or hide. There's a number of different ways of doing this, as is normally the case with A10. You can do things in more than one way. Another way of doing it is we click on the control button here, which is button 1, and then we get 2 option buttons, 19 and 20. And by cycling through those options buttons, once again we switch on and off certain items. While we're in that control mode, if we move down to OSB 17 and we click on the change settings buttons, we can see we get a menu of options which we can change, and we can change them quite easily using, once again, 19 and 20 to scroll to the particular one we want to change, and then 18 to switch it or toggle it one way or the other. Once we've toggled it, we have to remember to click on button 3 to save it before we return to the TAD using button 1. So we're back on the main screen now, and a couple of things I want to talk about while we're on this standard mode, and that's the way the scaling can work, or the zooming feature. Now if I zoom out, we can see our mouse cursor. We can rotate our mouse cursor around the place, and we can zoom in or out using our DMS key. We can also zoom out by pushing the cursor to the boundaries of the screen. Now unfortunately, pushing the cursor to the boundaries of the screen, no matter what side of it is, tends to change it in the same direction. In other words, we tend to be zooming out all the time, and when we reach a maximum we can't zoom in. This to me is not very useful, and I would have expected that we could zoom in or out using either the left or right boundaries, or the up or down boundaries. It's not the case, and maybe it'll be fixed in a future version of A10. So the other thing I want to talk about is the map that we use, that we're looking at, and this confuses people, I believe, and people get confused between the scale representing the map here and the scale on the TAD. Now we're fully zoomed out at the moment. We can see we're looking at an area of 320 miles by 320 miles. Zooming factor is 160, or sorry, scale factor is 160, and we're using a map. This is important. We're using a map in this scale, which has a scale of its own of 1 inch to 5 miles. Now that basically gives the legibility of the map. And if I zoom out, if I start zooming in, one step, we can see it's the same map, except it's just magnified a little bit. But if we zoom in another step, we see that the map actually changes completely, the color and even the descriptions that are on there. And we've also got a different scaling factor here. So in map auto mode here, basically what we're doing is the system calls up a different map depending on the scaling factor we're using on the TAD. It's a bit of old technology. I mean, it's not like Google Maps, where Google Maps can nearly zoom in from the planet of the Earth right down to a few feet almost. So this is kind of old technology, but that's the way it works, and I hope it unconfuses it for some people. Now if we were to change the map mode to the manual mode, what that does is it forces the system to use the same map no matter what scaling factor we're on, and it chooses the map that we're currently on for the rest of the scaling. So you can see we're scaled out to 160, and it's using the 1 to 5 mile map. Now the problem with using that map for everything is, as you see, it's just like using a magnifying glass. You can magnify, but you don't get any more information. You just get closer to the page and you see the pixels on the page. So that's exactly what's happening there. If we change to auto once again, and we change our zoom, and we go to manual, we do the same thing with that map. You see, when we zoom out, we can see nothing, and when we zoom in, you can kind of see nothing. So that's the way the maps work. Just before we leave this this mode and start looking at the other modes, just a little bit on a couple of more features here. One feature here is the declutter button, and by decluttering we can see we can switch most things off. So by combination of the switches on the main screen, we can declutter the screen, although I'm not sure how useful a screen like this would be to anybody. I'm going to switch these back on. Another issue I have with the standard, the default arrangement, is the speed of the cursor, and the speed of the cursor stays the same irrespective of what zoom level we have. Now the problem I see with that is that, and it'll be dependent on how your micro switch is set up for it. With my micro switch it tends to just move around a little bit quickly, so I'm going to adjust that, and you adjust that by using the button 12 down here, the start button, and we select it, and then we select the next page, and we scroll down to the throttle option here, and we can see we have a slew rate of 4. Now the slew rate is actually counterintuitive, because you would expect that a higher slew, well, it doesn't say slew rate, but a higher slew value would enable the cursor to move around more quickly. It's actually the opposite. So we want to slow it down.
Passing waypoint 3 at 6,000.
So we want to slow it down, and the way we do that is by increasing the number. And I'm going to put in the number 7 on the UFC, and then I'm going to select it. So to get back to the main screen, we just click on the tab button, and now we can see, if I make it the SOI, we can see that it moves around at a nicer pace to give me more accurate positioning. Now it could be argued that, some people may argue that, okay, it's too slow to get you onto the target when you really need it, but I argue that if you use that in combination with your DMS up and down switch, you should be able to get to your target very quickly and then focus in very accurately. So for instance, if I'm way off here at 160 miles, I can get very quickly back to where my jet is by zoomed out and then zooming in very closely, and then I can get very accurately on the position. Okay, so now we're going to look at the expand modes, and I really treat those together because they do exactly the same thing, with the exception that one has got double the resolution of the other. And let's look at the EXP mode 1 first of all, and the way we get to that is we click China hat forward short once, and you see we're in EXP mode. We can toggle it again to get EXP2, and toggle it once more to get back to our standard moving map mode. So one more time with feeling, back to EXP1 mode. So I'm going to zoom into this now and let's have a look what we see. So we see one thing is different for a start, and that's we don't have any indication of the scaling factor on this map, and it's probably the single biggest disadvantage of this mode. Although having said that, this mode, I use it once I get anywhere near the target area, and for anything to do with target management and combat. It's absolutely, I believe, essential for combat, and it gives a very intuitive look and feel to how you can assess the directions of ingress and egress and where threats are, and you can be sure that you can zoom in or you can move your cursor and look in great detail at where the action is and know what's happening. And I would suggest that anybody who hasn't used this should give it a try and persevere with it for a while, because once you get used to it you'll never look back. The other mode is very valuable for long distance navigation, for approach and takeoff, and managing flights in transit. But this one is definitely going to be the one that I would suggest you use for combat environment. So while we're on this, there's a couple of buttons before we get into too much detail. I'll just explain the scaling on this one, and I'm going to zoom out in the same way, or zoom in the same way, using the DMS up, and we can see that I need to just move it to somewhere where we can recognize. Okay, I'm going to center it on our 0 and I've made these waypoints. Waypoint 1 is 5 miles from 0 and so on, so that we can actually see the scaling factor. So if I zoom into that fully and put it on the screen, we can see that a fully zoomed in screen in EXP mode represents 5 miles north to south, and similarly east to west, so it's 5 by 5. So it's twice as detailed as the standard mode, which, if you remember, is a 10 by 10 mile across the screen and up top to bottom. And when I zoom out, unfortunately we don't get any indication of the zoom, but we know it's double each time, so I'll count by pressing the buttons. So DMS down once, so our standard is 5, 10, 20, 40, 80, 160, and that's it. So in this mode, when we're fully zoomed out, we can see an area of 160 by 160, which is half the standard mode. In EXP2 mode, there's even a higher resolution, and our most expanded mode, if I go from the most zoomed out and I click it once, most zoomed in, and I click it once, we can see it's 5 miles. So the lowest or the highest zoom rate is 2.5 miles. So this gives a resolution of 2.5 miles by 2.5 miles. And if I zoom out, it's 2.5 miles, 5, 10, 20, 40. Let's do that again. So it's 2.5, 5, 10, 20, 40, 80. That's it. So it's 80 by 80. So the three different modes represent, starting off at the minimum, 2.5 miles, 5 miles and 10 miles, and for the maximum it's 80, 160 and 320 miles. So this is the mode that I would use most of the time in a battle environment, and I'd probably be zoomed in by 2 notches. So starting off at the this is the EXP1 mode, and I'd be zoomed in by maybe 2 notches. So that would give us 20 or 40 miles on the screen. Okay, before I move on to look at some of the hooking features and functions, just a couple of comments on some of the OSB buttons we haven't commented on.
Warning, autopilot.
Yeah, I need to go back into autopilot first. So okay, we'll just have a quick talk about some of the buttons here. And first is the SPI button here, and we can select the SPI off or on by clicking the DMS left short, left long, or the DMS left long. And when the SPI is on, what essentially we're doing is we're displaying our SPI to any people who are connected to us within our network. So in other words, generally that's going to be our flight or our wing. And I'll explain what a SPI is now while we're on this subject. We can see the little wedding cake symbol in white there, and that represents the SPI. Basically it's a unified point system that allows sensors to slave to a particular position, a GPS position. And at the moment we can see we have our waypoints, which are characterized by the green square, and we have our steer point, which is characterized by the yellow. And currently the steer point that we've selected is the SPI, but it doesn't have to be. The SPI could be anything. It could be a spot in space, it could be a mark point. It doesn't have to be the current steer point. Or it could be slaved from different sensors. It could be slaved from the HUD, or it could be slaved from our a targeting pod. In this mode, if I cycle through the steer points, cycle through the waypoints, making them different steer points, we can see the SPI is carried with them. So when this is on, it means that anybody who's looking at their TAD will see a representation of this. It'll be a smaller wedding cake symbol on their jet, and they'll see it at exactly the same location. So what they can do is they can hook it and turn it into their own full SPI and slave their own sensors to it, and that's a way of passing on information. So we look down on this list here, we have a net button here, and this net button, we click on it, we see there's two options, bits of information. We have a known ID and a group ID, and currently you can see some symbols on the map here. We can see a green circle here. That green circle represents a flight or a unit, a friendly aircraft, and we also have this blue one here, and the blue one represents also a friendly aircraft, and he's my wingman. And the reason why he's blue is because he's in my group. Now if I change my group, and I do this by entering a number on the UFC and change the group ID, we can see that green symbol is gone. So he's no longer in my group because I've changed the group. If I change it back, we see he's back into it. Now also the IDs must be unique. In other words, if we want somebody to be displayed in our group, we can't give them the same number as someone else in the group. And I'm 01, and by default the wingman is going to be 02. Okay. So we can see most of the symbols we've looked at now. We can see waypoints, steer points, and friendly air units. You can also see our Bullseye unit here.
Autopilot.
Our Bullseye symbol. I need to get back into autopilot. And we can zoom into those symbols, and now let's look at what happens when we put the cursor over those objects. And I call all the symbols objects from now on, because an object could be a steer point, a waypoint, a mark point, a SPI, or even a ground unit or an air unit. So let's look at the objects. Let's look at the objects on the map. When I choose to cover an object, we can see we get a line from our own aircraft to it, and we get some additional information on the screen. We can see, for instance, we can see the latitude and longitude coordinate, and we also see a bearing and a distance. And by moving on to different objects, we can get the coordinates of those particular objects. Now I need to switch back to our standard TAD screen, and once we're back at our TAD screen, we can see when I choose an object, we get an additional option here, and this is what's called the hook mode. And this is very important because it enables us to decide how information about objects are presented on this screen when we make them the focus. And by default you can see hook to on, and I'll explain how that works. If I just zoom into it a little bit, we can see that we have an arrow coming from a steer point, which is waypoint 3, to our jet. And what we've got is we've got a bearing from here pointing in the direction of the arrow, and we've got a distance to what's hooked on the end of the arrow, and you can see it's moving. So currently you can see our jet is at 066. It's at a heading of 066 from steer point 3, and I'm going to have to adjust because I'm going too far inland. I'm going to have to come out of the TAD mode. I'll come back to this in a second, and I'm going to
Warning,
take us
autopilot.
back closer to the sea. Okay, I'll leave us in that orientation for a little while. So, as I was saying, you can see we've got different objects we can hook onto, and we get information about the location of the object that's doing the hooking, and also the bearing and the heading to the object being hooked. Now we can swap this over by clicking on the mode here, and we can see it changes now. So we can see now it's the information there is the heading and the distance from my aircraft to steer point 3. So it's at a heading of 234, which is correct. And if we want to lock that zoom in position, we can do this by selecting the object and TMS up short, and we can see that that object remains fixed. And that can be useful if you're focusing on some other part of the screen that you don't see your aircraft, but you can see a line to it, or the object you want to target. So in order to disconnect that hook, we just use TMS down short. Now there's a particular mode that I find very useful, and the reason why I've put the bullseye in this position is to demonstrate how this works. So I'm zooming into the bullseye and I'm putting my cursor on the bullseye, and now I'm going to change the mode, and I'm going to switch the mode until it becomes bullseye to cursor. And what that does is anything to cursor is going to give a continuous well, it's a it's a dashed line, but it'll be a continuous arrow from the object to the cursor. So wherever the cursor is, the arrow is going to follow. And in this mode we can see we're not seeing very much information, but if for instance we were to check it against steer point 1, we can see the steer point 1 is currently roughly 350 degrees and 5 miles from 0. 2 is 325 and 10 miles. 3 is 336 and 20 miles. 4 is 351 and 40 miles, or 41 miles, and so on. So we can see that we can get information about the object, and I can even check myself, and I can see that my current bullseye is approximately 350 for 29 miles. So not very much use on its own if the only thing you're looking at is objects on the map which are also already pre-designated, but it can be used to very quickly find a bullseye call without going through the offset. And I'll show you the procedure for this. First thing we've got to do is we've got to display the information continuously on the screen for the bullseye, for the cursor position, and we do this by selecting any object, so we get our data up on our screen, and then clicking TMS up once, and now we've got information about the cursor and where it is in space. Before I just do this, I just want to note that the hooking object reference information comes up on the bottom of the screen, and choosing this button here we can display it either as MGRS, we can switch it off, or we can display it as latitude and longitude. That's a small digression. Okay, so we're back to this bullseye to cursor, and we can see that that all positions now are clearly visible wherever we bring the cursor, and this is very useful. Now let's say a bullseye call is made, and it's something like, I don't know, let's say it's 320 for 25 miles. So I can essentially move this round until we get 320 and 25 miles, so that's 24 miles. So we just move it up a little bit to get 24 miles, 25 miles. And if I zoom in, I can get that even more accurate. So that position then gives us that bullseye call, and it's a very easy job now to turn that into a mark point by clicking TMS right short. And we can see now once we have a mark point, we can do anything with that. We can turn that into a SPI, and we can pass it on to our wing as as targets, or we can even slave our targeting pod to it. And we've got all the good functionality of MarkPoint, so it's so easy to use that in a heat of battle where there's a lot of bullseyes being called. If you want to pick on one of those and quite easily find it, that's a very effective way of doing it. And I'm just going to do a couple here. You can see that's B and this is C. Now in order to make this those into SPs, it's a very simple matter of going to the UFC and using the function button, changing to the mark point, clicking on the mark key, and now we can see the three keys there, A, B and C, and by selecting one of those, we can cycle between each of them. So you can imagine if we were to designate 5 or 6 targets close to one another as they were being called, we can quite easily then cycle through these, and once our other instruments are slaved to the SPI, they'll automatically zoom in and focus on the particular mark point. So in order to get away, in order to get out of that mode, we can see to knock off the display of those positions on the screen. It's the same again. It's TMS back short, and that disappears from the screen. And remember that we'll always have an arrow associated with the cursor once we're in cursor mode. And if we want to switch off the arrow completely, we're going to have to go back to a different mode, as we can see it there, and it's gone. So that covers most of the functionality of the hooking, symbols and systems.
Warning, autopilot.
Okay, I'm going to come out of autopilot mode, and I'm going to head back towards land. I think we've drifted a good bit out now. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a JTAG call, and I'm going to get him to pass through data link the position of a target, and I'll just demonstrate how that looks on the TAD and how it works. So if we look down at our screen here, we've got our forward air controller. I think that's probably him here, represented by the X. Okay, so we're going to head in his general direction, and we can see how easy it is to navigate using the EXP mode. We can see we should be heading kind of east, and once we're on the track, we can see it by the direction given here. Our wingman is also following us. Okay, so we're going to try and contact him now. I'm not sure whether we're too far out or not, but we'll try. Trying on the FM radio. JTAGs. JTAG 1.
X-Men 1-1. This is in field 1-1-2 A10. Foxtrot Golf 7558 13,000. Armed with AGM-65D bombs. CBU 97 1,150 gun. Time on station is 0 plus 30. Available for tasking. What do you have for us? Infield 1-1. This is Axeman 1-1. Type 3 in effect. Advise when ready for 9 line.
Ready to copy.
Ready to copy. Line is as follows. 1, 2, 3 NA. 120 feet MSL. AAA. Kilo, Mike, 5256339. No mark. Southeast, 6000. Egress, east. Advise when ready for remarks and further talk on.
Ready to copy remarks.
Ready to copy remarks. Request AGM 65D 3 CU23 Northwest 0 nautical. SA9 East 1 nautical.
Read back.
120 Kilo Mike 5256339. Read back correct. Infield 1-1. Standby data.
Okay, now we're going to get the data.
1-1. Clear to engage.
Okay, we can see we got a new tasking, and we can acknowledge that using the acknowledge button. And acknowledge again to get rid of the message. And we can see the symbology that's on the screen. We've got a Senko and a Wilco key, and also an attack request. So I'm going to, and we've also got, most importantly, our little red diamond. So what I've got to do is, and I can't leave it too long, got to hook onto that diamond, zoom into it and get an accurate position for it, and then I'm going to make it a mark point. Once I've made it a mark point, I can do, once again, as I said, what I wish with it. And when I've made it a mark point, I can now confirm I've accepted the attack, and switch either from the Wilco or the Senko button, switch that off. So now I'm going to go into my mark mode by clicking on function and mark button, and I'm going to change to mark point D, and that's it there. And I need to just check if my TGP is switched on yet. It's not live yet. Okay, and I'm going to move to point towards the location of that, and I need to see where I am. Yeah, so I need to turn around a few degrees more, and I'm going to slave that position in with my TGP, and there we have it. And I'm going to zoom in, and we can see some objects to be targeted. So that pretty much covers most of the symbology on the TAD, with the exception of the messaging and the passing of speeds in multiplay mode, and hopefully I'll produce a small video later on which demonstrates that. One bit I haven't covered is that it is possible to use air-to-air mode. It is possible to hook onto your wingman. I'll just do this. He may be too close, but I can do this. If I zoom out, I'll zoom into the most expanded mode. It will help. And I'm going to actually I'm going to have to switch the mode. I switch the mode by selecting an object and own to hook. Okay, so now I'm going to move to his position, and try and hook. Okay, so I've got him hooked now, and I could actually go into, if he wasn't so close to me, I could actually go into air-to-air mode and slave my TGP to it, and I should be able to pick his position up on the TGP. So that pretty much covers all the TAD, and once again, the TAD is an extremely useful instrument for battle and situation awareness, and particularly the EXP modes. And I suggest if you can master the TAD and spend time with those modes, particularly the expanded mode, it'll definitely improve your battle skills and situational awareness. Once again, I look forward to any feedback, and thanks for watching.